Hi, and welcome back to the Audrain Automobile Museum and our exhibition Wonders in Wood on Land and by Sea. Once again, David DiMuzio, our executive director, and I are here to take a closer look at the cars in this exhibition in this segment. And we're going to see something that I think will surprise some and amaze many. One of the things that we talked about before in this exhibition was the idea of wood being used in cars and boats for utility, efficiency, style, and fashion. In this segment, we are certainly going to see efficiency and certainly style. We might even veer into fashion, but I'll let you and our viewers decide. The first car we're going to talk about is, and we said this in the exhibition opening video, let's just say it's our favorite show. It's our favorite car in the show. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
This 1925 Arnold car. And it is a marvelous thing because it's such a great example of how wood was used in the way that it was traditionally used at this time to build cars, which is to say structurally, and we'll look at that, and also as the actual structure of the car itself, the body of the car, not simply the supporting character, it was the lead character. So David, tell us about this extraordinary car and how it uses wood.
Well, it really is different than some other things we've looked at, and I think of it as, in 1925, the modern use of wood because it incorporates plywood, which was a fairly new thing.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because people think today of plywood as, oh, that's something cheap when you can't use something else. But plywood was a wonder material and allowed craftsmen to do great new things.
Yeah, it was structurally stable, which solid wood is not so much. And you can get it in very even thicknesses. Saves you a lot of time preparing wood before you apply it to what you're doing. So that was a great thing. So it's made out of actually two kinds of plywood. We call lumber core. So it's a thin, like 2 or 3 millimeter thick, solid mahogany core with cross-banding top and bottom to make it stable.
Let's explain again. We'll take some of this. It won't be a graduate level course, but cross-banding, what does that mean?
Cross-banding is when you're gluing wood 90 degrees grain to each other. And what that does is it eliminates the expansion and contraction you normally get with solid wood with changes in relative humidity. So it makes the material much more stable. It won't crack or shrink and leave gaps like you see in your furniture at home, your old furniture at home.
Or your doors.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it eliminates all that, and it also allows them to essentially use sheet materials pre-made to cover the body, the frame of the body. So
and let's talk about how the craftsmen at La Fossaine, the coach builder in Paris, used this incredible material to make the shapes of this car.
Yeah, so it's not, the technique, I think of it as being somewhat furniture-like. You could argue that speedboats of this period were also made using plywood, but being a furniture person, I think of furniture first, where the idea of using large panels of veneer. In this case, you have beautiful mahogany veneer with nice grain. You can see they've taken it to the next level with some cross-banded inlay and some mother of pearl dots, which really is very furniture-like, and just a wonderful way to decorate in a subtle way. We were talking about this earlier. Remember, this car is also in very good state of preservation. It's not been over-restored in any way. Although the top of the body has been refinished, remember that when this was new, the mahogany was a deep burgundy color with this contrasting light inlay. So it had a very rich appearance to it. We've lost some of that with age.
It is quite marvelous as you described it, because both of us said this is a piece of furniture for the road, and especially the work in the graining, in the cross-banding, and the mother of pearl inlay is very reminiscent of the furniture of Carlo Bugatti, in fact. And that this was built for a bailli in Tunisia and lived its life in Tunis is also remarkable because, as you said, the car was originally a much darker color before it was sun faded.
That's
and
right.
even with that, understanding that the car was going to be used outside, since that's what we do with cars. The way it's faded is also very attractive. You know, when you use quality materials and you use them in a way that's very thoughtful and intentional, then you don't get sort of accidents in aging.
Yeah, so it's really aged. It has a beautiful patina to it. There's some other things that I wanted to point out, and that's the dashboard, which has not been refinished. So it has that degraded natural resin on it. The whole body would have looked like that if they hadn't refinished it, although I understand why they did. We have these aluminum fenders with this very subtle engine turning on it, which is still there, hasn't been polished away with time. And a really interesting feature is the side of the car has Lincrusta, essentially wallpaper on it. So Lincrusta it's a cousin of linoleum, so made with resin and wood fiber, pressed into fairly thick sheets, maybe 4 millimeters thick, and embossed with a pattern. In this case, a caning pattern, which you would find on other cars. Rolls Royce, Hispano Suiza did this as well, as a way to sort of give it a decorative, the outside of the body, a decorative theme. This is sort of the poor man's version of it. Maybe that's not fair, but it's an interesting
the middle class version of it.
So it's done in this, the whole side is done, and it would have been stained and toned to really be sympathetic to the body color as well. And it survives, and it's just a wonderful thing.
And the designers of this car also not only took the care to add these wonderful details, but also, again, the entire marine form. Not only the great boat tail you see on a skiff, it's a skiff body. The windshield, the separate windshield is very much like a speedboat of the time. The shape of the dashboard, the scuttle, the way the doors cut down, it all says speedboat.
Yeah, and this model, the Petite Sport, part of its inception was really about meeting the tax criteria, reduced taxes if you had a car that weighed under 350 kilograms and had a motor smaller than 1.1 liters. In this case, a little under 1 liter for a 4-cylinder, and a car that meets that weight restriction. So very light, and had to be a 2-seater as well to meet that tax requirement. So that's partially why this car even exists, I think. We do know that Amilcar made skiff bodies, and we have one in the collection that's quite wonderful with aluminum body. It's a larger version of this. This is just it's small and precious in a wonderful way.
It's absolutely amazing. And of course, in this we also see the traditional body making forms. So when we open up the trunk, you'll see that you can see the ribs just as they build a boat.
That's right.
And in the sides, it's very interesting, as we noted, that underneath the panels supporting the Lincrusta, there's also a wonderful jute that's been laid in and glued in to reinforce it.
Yes.
It's a fascinating thing to see, and brings us to that efficiency part of our conversation because of the way the body is framed in wood, but it's a wood body. But now we'll see how, from basically the time that cars were made of metal, from shortly before the First World War, with the exception of some cast bodies, which we won't get into because it's not a part of this show, how bodies were framed and how wood made it most efficient to do it.
This is interesting.
Let's take a look. Here is one of the most exciting parts of the exhibition because it's a literal work in progress. It's like one of those cutaway V8s. This 1928 Bugatti Type 44 is in the perfect stage of its restoration because it shows exactly how wood-framed bodies were made, how they're restored, how they supported the bodywork. It tells the entire story.
It's amazing. To see a pre-war Bugatti on the road is special enough. To see one in the gallery in this state is just truly amazing.
And what is really so exciting about this is the idea that when automobiles, and we will get to in one of our videos in the show, the 1892 Brewster Park Drag, which is the oldest vehicle in the show, which of course is entirely made of wood except for some iron fixtures. But when cars transitioned from horseless carriages to motor cars, it was very quickly decided that once you got to a certain level of power and speed, that wood bodies, totally wood bodies, were really quite impractical. And so, you needed something that was metal. Also in this time, the chassis was a very integral part of the suspension, so bodies flexed and moved. So what was that best combination of something which would allow flex and movement, wood, to something that would seal well and be of light weight, metal? So it's very interesting. So how did they choose the wood that was best for body framing?
Well, there are certain species of wood that have a really good strength to flex ratio, and European ash is one, white oak is another, that are primarily used for these kind of structural things. You'll see in American cars birch and maple used as well for framing, but not so much serious structural things. So a lot of ash, which this car has, and it's wonderful because you see the new wood that's been added recently, and you also see the very heavily patinaed old wood in the doors and so forth. You can see exactly the way it's survived over time. It's really remarkable. New floorboards going in, but still lots of old and new wood to see in this car, which really tells a story. Another interesting thing is in this particular to Bugatti, is they really had a process that allowed them to form very thin sheet metal in steel. Now, they used aluminum in their Grand Prix cars, but in their street cars, they worked remarkably well, thin steel panels, both being supported by wood.
Now, one of the things also, you mentioned the tensile quality of the woods chosen, but also, we also needed to see a certain amount of resistance to water, to insects. So, what role did that play as well?
Well, certainly, white oak is much better than red oak. There are other species like elm, which was used because it has sort of interlocking grain. It's very tough, but hard to work. So ash, it's not so much rot resistant. So you do see them putting preservative coatings or even paint to help preserve the wood because you're not going to be able to get to it again once all the sheet metal goes on. So they were aware of the shortcomings and tried to prepare the car for longevity.
What's also very interesting about seeing this vehicle in this state is that it also illustrates the challenges of being a caretaker and especially a restorer of a car like this. This car is owned and being restored by our great friend Evan Ide, who you've seen here on the Audrain Museum Network before. And what's really interesting is the fact that he, like every careful restorer, looks to save as much original material in the wood as possible. So he very carefully looks for areas of weakness, cuts away the metal where he has to replace the wood, also keeping as much of the original metal as possible. So it's a real balancing act and looking to see how they can best blend the original material, but put in new material so the car can actually be used again as the makers intended.
Yeah, and I think it does. He talks about this. A car that's never been restored, like, I don't know, 69 Camaro, and one that's had a rotisserie restoration, they drive like completely different cars. So I think Evans, being conservative and in preservation is an important part of this, but also I think it keeps the soul and the integrity of the original feel of the car there.
And it's also a fascinating thing to understand when you look at this car, and hopefully if you get a chance to come to the exhibition and look at this car in the gallery, it's really exciting. But you'll see in this video some detail of how the old wood was worked. And Evan uses the same techniques to work the new wood, so you really understand why they do certain things, why they make certain choices, and why it has worked and lasted as long as it has in this car.
I think it gives you a better understanding. You're choosing the correct wood as the original, the correct orientation of grain, and then working it in a similar way. So you get a really good feel of how it's going to go together.
And as we mentioned in an earlier video about the Morris Oxford shooting brake, the fact that when that car was made, Morris had already moved to all steel bodies for their sedans. And so we're going to see that while the movement to all steel bodies and losing the wood framing had begun in the late 1920s, it's still around with us today. So we're going to see a really exciting and interesting example of that.
Yeah.
Let's go. So it was 1928. They were building that wonderful Bugatti in the traditional manner with the wood framing and the metal on the body. And it's 1957, and we're in Malvern, England, and they're building this Morgan, and they're doing the same thing.
The same thing. One of the few manufacturers that even today still uses this wonderfully traditional technique.
And it's very funny because a lot of people who don't know a lot about Morgans just know, Morgan, it's an English car, and it's all made of wood, right? Like even the wheels and the chassis, everything's wood. And it's like, no, that's not quite true. But the fact that they actually use the wood for all the reasons that manufacturers used it back in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. The Morgan delivers a very lightweight, flexible, in a good way, sports car. And I think that whenever Morgan has attempted to step into the future, except for the very recent times, the Morgan traditionalists have said, hold on, you're not going to get away with this. This is what we want.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting thing because when you think about sort of the driving experience of a car, and if you can actually feel how a car is built in the way it drives, I would swear that you can actually feel it in this car.
Yeah, the subtle difference.
Exactly.
To an all-steel car.
An all-steel car, especially an English Roadster of this period, is a really creaky thing.
Yeah.
All the time. It's amazing that you figure, oh, it's a wood-framed body, it's got to creak like crazy. No! The flexibility of the wood actually gives it further solidity in a way that obviously is the same as a boat. A fast boat is designed to move with the waves, not fight the waves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And in the gallery, people wonder at first glance, why is it even here? I don't see any wood. Well, there's wood on the dashboard. That's fair game. But it's completely covered with sheet metal or the wood that you do see, and there's some here in the back. It's painted black, so you don't really necessarily know it's wood.
Go to it.
Yeah, but if you crawl underneath, same thing. It's mostly painted or has preservative on it, but in fact it is wood. So, it looks like an all-steel car, but in fact, and we have photographs on the wall that are contemporary, from just a few years ago. They're using the same tools, the same jigs, the same species of wood to put together the frames before the sheet metal goes on.
As you said, you didn't see the fluorescent lighting in the ceiling and the very modern screws they were using.
Yeah.
This could be 1967, 1957, 1947, 1937, 1927,
That's right.
1917.
That's right.
It's absolutely extraordinary and a great example of how the efficiency of wood is still used in a very, very, very traditional and useful way. The last car we're going to look at here reminds us a bit of the Amilcar, but I think it's our first glimpse, even though the Amilcar is a very decorative object,
Yes.
into a bit of fashion, shall we say.
Over the top.
Over the top. Let's look. We saw the first car we talked about, a skiff-bodied 1925 Amilcar. Now we're going a bit earlier. This is a 1914 Rolls Royce Silver Ghost London to Edinburgh skiff-bodied tourer by Schiebero of Berlin. It's a dramatic car, certainly, and one would think that being closer to the origins of the motor car and the sort of traditional marine techniques of building a wood body, that this would have very, very, very authentic, much like the Herreshoff amphi craft that we saw, because we see this, obviously this beautiful mahogany lapstrake body, yes? Or
yes,
no?
The closer you look, you realize they were very clever. They certainly knew what they wanted it to look like, and that's a lapstrake skiff. But in fact, I won't say they cheated. They used a technique that was better for their application. So I don't want to use the word, but I will. Faux lapstrake, in the sense that these are not individual boards, but in fact wider boards that are milled to look as if they're individual boards. It simplifies construction a bit. The other thing you'll notice is, unlike the copper riveted Amphikraft, you see no fasteners on the outside of this and no plugs hiding fasteners. So how did they attach this to the frame? Well, they did it cleverly from the inside where you don't see it. They also, well, this is true of many early cars. There's no door on the driver's side.
Yes.
That also strengthens and simplifies construction. So you only enter the car from the far side.
Well, part of that was technically legitimate because you have the brakes and controls on the outside.
You have running
so
gear that's in your way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have those going up your trouser leg as you got in and out of the car. But this is a car built for its presence. And dare I say, we have now gone slightly past efficiency, certainly into style and perhaps even to fashion. But we're still in 1914, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. Yeah. But it certainly is an incredibly dramatic car, and it also speaks as well to this period of car building, where a yacht for the road is something which is very, very, very dramatic and desirable here on the eve of World War I. The statement that a Rolls Royce like this would make in any big city, in Berlin, in London, in Paris, New York.
Well, a Silver Ghost by itself would make the statement, but then to have a body like this, which there are only a few have made, truly remarkable. And
one of the other things is the fact that this body was placed on a chassis of the endurance high performance model, the London to Edinburgh, a car designed to cover vast distances at great speed with great solidity. We were talking earlier also about the fact that so many of these cars, because they were so durable and so powerful, were reused later. In fact, some of them during World War I, when they lost their very fancy dress bodies and became vehicles of utility, trucks, ambulances. And it's a great tribute to this design, its incredible versatility. And this is a sports car in a way that we don't think of today as a sports car.
No, well, sheer size. I mean, a two-seater this long and with such a presence.
Well, you do have a dicky seat, so it's a sort of a two plus one.
Okay. I'll give you that.
But it is certainly dramatic, and I think that it really shows that even early on in this process of combining the qualities of boats and cars, that there was a certain romanticism about it that could not be denied and was effortlessly and exuberantly expressed in this Rolls Royce, that's for sure.
Varnished mahogany, you just can't beat it.
Well, we will see further examples going into style and certainly directly into fashion in future videos, and we'll get to learn a little bit more about the construction methods we talked about today, how they don't appear here and how they do appear in some boats, and why. The difference between utility, strength, speed, beauty. Thanks for joining us. And if you're not a subscriber to the Audrain Museum Network, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon to be notified when we put up new content, and follow us on Instagram. We'll see you back here soon. Thanks.
Check this out.